Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Stephen Cowens. March 1998. A fingerprint examiner takes the stand. The question before her is simple. Does the latent print recovered from a glass mug match the defendant's known print? Her answer is delivered without hesitation. It is a positive identification. The jury is told this is not probable, not likely, certain. 6 years later, DNA evidence excluded Stephen Cowens entirely. Welcome to True Locus. Forensic evidence is interpreted, presented, and sometimes misunderstood in the courtroom. If this kind of analysis interests you, subscribe to follow the series, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Fingerprint analysis has been used in criminal courts for over a century. The premise is elegant. No two individuals share the same fingerprint pattern. Therefore, a match should uniquely identify a suspect. This uniqueness is not disputed. What matters is whether an examiner can reliably determine that two impressions came from the same source. The assumption underlying courtroom testimony is that trained examiners can make this determination with near absolute accuracy. In practice, analysts rarely work with complete prints. Crime scene impressions are partial, distorted, overlapping. They may be smudged by movement, contaminated by other prints, or degraded by the surface they were left on. The examiner's task is to compare ridge patterns between the latent print, the one found at the scene, and a reference sample taken under controlled conditions. This comparison is not mechanical. It is interpretive. It relies on the examiner's experience, their training, and their judgment. And the language used to communicate findings in court often obscures that fact. Juries hear terms like positive identification, to the exclusion of all others, or 100% certainty. These phrases suggest a level of precision that the underlying methodology does not always support. Examiners identify features called minutiae, points where ridges split, end, or form distinct shapes. These are the landmarks used to compare prints. If enough minutiae align between two prints and the overall pattern is consistent, the examiner may conclude they share a common source. But how many points of similarity are enough? No universal standard exists. Some jurisdictions historically required 12 matching points. Others accepted 8. The FBI eliminated its numerical point standard in the 1970s, leaving the sufficiency determination entirely to examiner judgment. This shift was intended to give examiners flexibility, but it also removed one of the few objective benchmarks in the process. The current standard method is called ACEV: analysis, comparison, evaluation, verification. It is structured, but not statistical. In the analysis phase, the examiner assesses the quality and clarity of the latent print. Is there enough detail to proceed? In comparison, the examiner places the latent print alongside the known print and looks for corresponding features. In evaluation, the examiner decides whether the similarities are sufficient to declare a match or whether the differences are significant enough to exclude the source. Finally, verification requires a second examiner to independently review the conclusion. This is a human decision at every stage. There is no algorithm, no probability calculation, no formula that translates the number of matching points into a statistical likelihood. The conclusion, identification, exclusion, or inconclusive, rests on the examiner's professional judgment. A CEV is not a statistical model. Yet in court, this judgment is often presented as if it were. The examiner testifies with confidence. The language used implies certainty, and juries understandably interpret that confidence as scientific fact. This is where the gap begins, between what the science can support and what the testimony conveys. In the Cowens case, the examiner testified to a positive identification. In courtroom language, and this often translates to absolute certainty. No margin of error, no equivocation. The fingerprint matched. The defendant left the print. There was no doubt. A 2011 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences tested this assumption. Researchers presented 169 certified fingerprint examiners with latent prints and asked them to compare each to a set of known prints. The task was straightforward: determine whether the prints matched. The results were illuminating. The error rate for false positives, declaring a match when none existed, was approximately 0.1%. That sounds reassuring. It suggests that errors are rare, but it is not zero. And in a criminal justice system that processes thousands of cases each year, rare errors accumulate. More troubling, when examiners were shown the same prints months later, without being told they had seen them before, some reversed their own conclusions. A print they had previously identified as a match was now excluded. A print they had excluded was now inconclusive. Repeatability is not guaranteed. This variability raises a fundamental question. If expertise is subjective, what role does bias play? Research shows that when examiners are given contextual information, suspect confessed, witness placed suspect at the scene, suspect has prior convictions, their judgments shift. They are more likely to declare a match. The same print, viewed with different context, can yield different conclusions. This is not dishonesty. It is cognitive bias. The examiner is not consciously altering their analysis, but knowing the narrative of the case influences perception. Details that might otherwise seem ambiguous are interpreted as confirmatory. Discrepancies are minimized. The conclusion aligns with expectation. This problem is not unique to fingerprint analysis. It appears across forensic disciplines, but fingerprint examiners have historically resisted acknowledging it. The profession has long maintained that experienced analysts working independently are immune to bias, that their judgments are objective, that their conclusions are reliable. The evidence suggests otherwise. The problem is not only scientific, it is linguistic. The way fingerprint evidence is communicated in court shapes how juries understand its reliability. Fingerprint examiners are trained to testify with confidence. Phrases like, "to the exclusion of all others" or "absolute certainty" are standard. Some agencies still teach examiners that error rates do not apply to their individual conclusions. That error rates reflect the performance of other examiners under different conditions and are therefore irrelevant to the case at hand. Confidence is not the same as certainty. This framing protects the examiner's credibility, but it also misleads the jury. A conclusion presented as certain carries far more weight than one presented as highly probable. And when cross-examination challenges the examiner's certainty, the response is often that their experience, their training, and their adherence to protocol make error effectively impossible. In 2016, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology reviewed the state of forensic pattern evidence, and their conclusion was measured but clear. Fingerprint analysis cannot claim to be infallible. It is a probabilistic discipline that has not been treated as one. Examiners should testify in terms of likelihood, not certainty. Error rates should be disclosed, and the subjective nature of the judgment should be acknowledged. The response from forensic institutions was defensive. Some argued that calling into question examiner testimony would undermine public trust in the criminal justice system. Others insisted that experienced analysts, properly trained and verified, do not make mistakes. That the PCAST report misunderstood the nature of fingerprint analysis. That it applied an inappropriate scientific standard to a method that has proven itself reliable in practice. But public trust is not the same as accuracy. And institutional resistance to probabilistic language does not make the science more certain. It only makes the testimony less honest. Stephen Cowan spent 6 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. The fingerprint examiner who testified against him was experienced. She had conducted thousands of comparisons. She followed the procedure she had been trained to use. She was not negligent. She was not corrupt. But she was wrong. When DNA evidence later proved his innocence, the fingerprint comparison was re-examined by independent experts. The print on the mug did not match Cowan's. The original conclusion could not be replicated. What had been presented in court as certain was, in fact, incorrect. This is not an indictment of fingerprint analysis as a discipline. Properly conducted, with appropriate context management and verification, it remains one of the most valuable tools in forensic science. It has identified countless suspects. It has excluded countless innocent individuals. When examiners work with clear, high-quality prints, the reliability is high. But it is not perfect. It is not immune to error. And it is not certain in the way juries are often told it is. The language of certainty serves the courtroom. It simplifies complex judgments. It provides juries with the clarity they expect. But it does not serve the truth. What we call a match is always an interpretation, and every interpretation carries risk. If this analysis resonated with you, consider subscribing to True Locus and turning on notifications. Your support allows us to continue examining the language of certainty in court, one case at a time.